Hello, and welcome to the TwelveMoon study group. I'm Zihara, and if you're new here, think of this space as a kind of study group for anyone curious about witchcraft in all its forms. The history, the practices across cultures, and the many different paths witches take today. I created this channel to share everything I'm learning along the way. I'm an eclectic witch myself, which means I don't follow just one tradition. I love exploring different practices, Wicca, folk traditions from around the world, and beyond. This channel is really my way of studying out loud and sharing the journey with anyone who's interested and curious about the craft. Because while Wicca often gets mixed in with all kinds of ideas about witches and ancient traditions, the real story of how it began is both fascinating and very modern. And understanding that history makes it a lot easier to see how Wicca has evolved into the vibrant spiritual path it is today. And since we just passed on Mabon, the autumn equinox, one of the 8 Sabbats in the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, it felt like the perfect time to dive into Wicca, where it started, how it's practiced today, and some of the myths and misconceptions around it. Before we dive into how Wicca looks in the modern world, let's step back for just a moment and touch on where it all began. Wicca, as we know it today, is actually a pretty recent religion. It really came into the public eye in the 1950s, thanks to a man named Gerald Gardner. Gardner claimed he had been initiated into a secret coven in England, and after the old witchcraft laws were repealed, he started sharing what he called the old religion. Now, Gardner didn't just invent things from scratch. He pulled together a lot of different influences. There were pieces of ceremonial magic and occult groups like the Golden Dawn and Freemasonry. There were elements of folklore and the so-called witch cult theory from anthropologist Margaret Murray. And of course, a deep reverence for older pagan gods and seasonal festivals. Out of all that, Wicca was born as a new but very nature-centered path. From there, it spread fast. In the UK, different branches like Alexandrian Wicca popped up, and by the 1960s and 70s, Wicca had crossed over into the United States. That's when we start seeing traditions like Dianic Wicca in the feminist movement and other offshoots shaped by the counterculture of the time. By the end of the 70s, Wicca had gone from one man's coven in England to a full-fledged international movement. Now, here's something important to remember. Wicca isn't an ancient survival that's been passed down unchanged from prehistoric times. It's better understood as a modern pagan religion, something new, but inspired by older traditions, gods, and practices. And honestly, that's part of what makes it so alive and adaptable today. Of course, this is just a very quick overview. I'll be doing a separate video diving much deeper into the history of Wicca, its key figures, the debates, and how it grew into the movement we know today. So if you're interested in the full story, definitely watch out for that one. So now that we've touched on how Wicca began, let's talk about something that often gets confused. The difference between Wicca and traditional witchcraft. Traditional or folk witchcraft is usually much more local and practical. Think of it as the magic passed down through families or communities, healing remedies, charms, working with spirits, and divination. It's not always religious. In fact, many folk practitioners historically considered themselves Christian while still using spells and herbal cures. Sometimes it's religious, with deities or rituals involved, and other times it's not, depending on the culture or practitioner. A good example would be the cunning folk of Europe or granny healers in Appalachia, who might blend herbal cures with Bible verses or folk charms. Wicca, on the other hand, is a modern pagan religion. It includes witchcraft, but within a structured spiritual framework. Wiccans honor deities, usually a goddess and god, sometimes seen as the divine feminine and masculine. celebrate the Wheel of the Year with 8 Sabbats like Mabon, and follow ethical guidelines such as the Wiccan Rede and the Threefold Law. So, while both Wiccans and traditional witches might cast spells or work with spirits, Wicca places those practices inside a defined religious path, while folk or traditional witchcraft tends to stay more local, practical, and flexible. Now here's where it gets a bit more nuanced. In today's world, a lot of witches don't fit neatly into just one box. Eclectic witches might blend both. For example, someone might celebrate the Wiccan Sabbats and honor the goddess and god, but also use family folk remedies or regional folk magic in their practice. This blending is super common now, especially with so many resources available online. At the end of the day, a lot of modern witches are weaving together what resonates with them, whether that's Wicca, traditional craft, or a bit of both. So to sum it up, Wicca is a religion, while witchcraft is a practice. Not all witches are Wiccan, and not all Wiccans are necessarily focused on folk-style magic, but both paths and the spaces where they overlap are part of the beautiful diversity of the witchcraft community today. So now that we've looked at the differences between Wicca and traditional witchcraft, let's talk about something that has really shaped Wicca from its beginnings and how it's changing today. In this next part of the video, we're going to look at how modern Wicca is evolving, especially around things like gender inclusivity and environmentalism. Wicca has always centered around the idea of divine polarity, the goddess and the god. Traditionally, Wiccan covens were built on this balance, with a high priestess and high priest leading together, and rituals often focused on the union of feminine and masculine energy. This made sense for the time when Wicca was founded in the 1950s, but it also meant the tradition leaned heavily on heteronormative roles. In fact, some of the early teachings said power had to be passed between a man and a woman, which left little space for LGBTQ+ witches or anyone who didn't fit neatly into that binary. But things have gotten better. Wicca has been evolving, and many covens today are breaking away from those old limitations. Most groups now recognize that energy and polarity don't depend on anatomy or gender. Anyone can embody those forces. Covens are dropping strict high priest, high priestess roles, letting leaders of any gender step into ritual. Some even avoid gendered titles altogether, focusing instead on balance and intention. This inclusivity also shows up in ritual. For example, some covens now write ceremonies that affirm trans and non-binary members, or create rites to mark gender transitions and chosen names. The heart of it is simple. All bodies and all identities hold magic, and all acts of love and pleasure really are sacred. Of course, there are still some groups that hold on to the old binary view, but overall, the movement is leaning toward inclusivity. Younger witches especially are vocal about reimagining the divine beyond male and female, and seeing the goddess and god as archetypes or energies that can be expressed in many ways. That's part of what makes Wicca resonate with people today. It's not stuck in the past. It's a living tradition, adapting to honor the diversity of the people who practice it. So we just looked at how Wicca is evolving around gender and inclusivity. Another huge theme that runs all throughout Wicca, and one that's especially relevant right now, is its deep connection to the earth.